Gopichana Palapa Kirivaratari Yasodanandana Prajajana Ranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari Yasodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari Yasodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Kishore Kishori ki jai, Jagannath Baladev Subhadra Marani ki jai, Gonitai ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Good morning. We're reading from Canto 11, Chapter 6, and the text is 48 through 49. So we'll chant 48 together. Vayam Tviha Mahayogin Brahmanta Karma Vatmashu Tvadvartaya Tarishyamas Tavakai Dushtaram Tamam Vayam Tviva Iha Mahayogin Brahmanta Karma Vatmasu Tvadvataya Tarishyamas Tavakar Dustaram Tamaham Vayam Tviha Mahayogin Brahmanta Karma Vatmasu Tvadvartaya Tarishyamas Tavakai Dustaram Tamam. Please chant. Vayam Tviha Mahayogin Brahmanta Karma Vatmasu Tvadvartaya Tarishyamas Tavakai Dustaram Tamam. Vayam Tviha Mahayogin Brahmanta Karma Vatmasu Vataya Tarishyatmas Vakai Dustaram Tamam. Vayam Tviha Mahayogin Brahmanta Karma Vatmasu Tvadvartaya Tarishyamas Tavakai Dustaram Tamam. Thank you very much. I'll chant text 49. Smaranta kirtayantaste kritani gaditani cha gati utsmite kshana shevel yanirloka vidambanam. And the word for word, vayam, we, two, on the other hand, iha, in this world, Mahayogin, O greatest of yogis, Brahmanta, wandering, Karma Vatmasu, on the paths of material work, Tvat, of you, Vartaya, by discussion of the topics, Tarishyama, will cross over, Tavakai, along with your devotees, Dustaram, insurmountable, Tama, darkness. And the translation for texts 48 and 49 combined by the disciples of Srila Prabhupada is as follows. O greatest of mystics, Although we are conditioned souls wandering on the path of fruitive work, we will certainly cross beyond the darkness of this material world simply by hearing about your Lordship in the association of your devotees. Thus we are always remembering and glorifying the wonderful things you do and the wonderful things you say. We ecstatically recall your amorous pastimes with your confidential conjugal devotees and how you boldly smile and move about while engaged in such youthful pastimes. My dear Lord, your loving pastimes are bewilderingly similar to the activities of ordinary people within this material world. And the purport by the disciples of Srila Prabhupada. In this verse, Uddhava, by stating Brahmanta Karma Vatmasu, humbly presents himself as one of the conditioned souls entangled in fruitive activities. Still, Uddhava is confident that he will certainly cross over the illusory energy because he is addicted to chanting and remembering the glorious activities and words of Lord Krishna. Similarly, Rupa Goswami has stated, Iha yasya harer dasye karmana manasa gira nikhila sav api avartasu jivan mukta sa uchyate. Although one may outwardly appear to be involved in the material world, if one is always engaged 24 hours a day in the service of Lord Krishna, then one is considered to be a liberated soul. Uddhava states here that hearing and chanting the holy name and pastimes of Krishna is infinitely more effective than becoming a naked yogi in the forest and running the constant risk of becoming due to lusty desires and sex indulgence, a naked monkey in the forest. Uddhava is begging the Lord for the mercy of his Sudarshan chakra, whose effulgence is represented by the process of remembering and chanting the pastimes of the Lord. One who absorbs himself in the incomparable bliss of thinking of the Lord's abode easily becomes free from all lamentation, illusion, and fear. That is the recommendation of Sri Uddhava. Om Jnana Timirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurin Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manopistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadanti Kam Vandeham Shri Guru Shuta Padakamlam Shri Guru Vaishnavam Cha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sagana Ragutam Vitam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padansa Gana Lalita Shri Vishaka Vitamscha. Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapsa Kanchana Gorangi Radha Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpataribhyascha Kripa Sindhubhye Vachapatitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnebhyo Namo Namaha. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pristaya Bhutale Shmata Romapada Swami iti namine Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pristaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami iti namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Sunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So I'll read the translation once again of Uddhava speaking. And he's addressing Krishna. O greatest of mystics, although we are conditioned souls wandering on the path of fruitive work, we will certainly cross beyond the darkness of this material world simply by hearing about your Lordship in the association of your devotees. Thus we are always remembering and glorifying the wonderful things you do and the wonderful things you say. We ecstatically recall your amorous pastimes with your confidential conjugal devotees and how you boldly smile and move about while engaged in such youthful pastimes. My dear Lord, your loving pastimes are bewilderingly similar to the activities of ordinary people within this material world. So, just in referencing Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur in Sarata Darshini, he states that Uddhava, out of humility, he shows that he also desires to cross over Maya. And as the disciples of Srila Prabhupada note from the purport that we read, Uddhava presents himself humbly as one of the conditioned souls entangled in fruitive activities. That's how he's presenting himself. Now, if we look at how you identify a conditioned soul, an explanation is given by Lord Krishna. So this is Lord Krishna's explanation. Is from Bhagavad Gita 5:15, where he said, so just the first sentence and then leading to how he explains who is the conditioned soul. Nor does the Supreme Lord assume anyone's sinful or pious activities. Embodied beings, however, are bewildered because of the ignorance which covers their real knowledge. So that, you could say, is a kind of definition of the conditioned soul, an ignorance which covers their real knowledge. And that particular verse is Nadate kasyachit papam nachaiva sukritam vibhu agnanena navritam jnanam tena muyanti jantava. So a conditioned soul means one having developed a particular behavior pattern that's influenced by their way of being. And just because one has been developing this behavior pattern influenced by one's way of being, their desires, those desires that accompany that, means that Lord Krishna puts one into certain conditions of life. And from there, a whole chain of actions and reactions begins. And I was thinking about this when I was looking at how this pattern of behavior starts to develop. And I could easily identify for myself that a lot has to do with the personalities that one comes into contact with and starts having association with. It definitely starts to form a certain behavior pattern within oneself. I was particularly thinking how graphic it was for me when I, although still living with my parents, when I moved into university, although I was still commuting back to my home with them, I was aware how my whole behavior started shifting because I was coming into contact with certain people, and so my interests and world started changing. So that's that. It's the beginning of a behavior pattern developing according to one's desires, who one starts associating with. So of course, certain reactions start coming too, and certain actions one starts taking as one starts forming one's life. Now, a living being has a superior nature, and that superior nature is full of knowledge. So that's the hidden part. And Lord Krishna's explanation points to the living being being prone to be being influenced by ignorance. We're just naturally prone to be influenced by ignorance because of the fact that we have a limited power. And limited power is Srila Prabhupada's words. That's the reason one comes to be influenced by ignorance. So as one's making one's choices, one makes choices that are actually detrimental to oneself or that are detrimental to others because one is influenced by ignorance. And because we have a limited power, our capacity to overcome an already formed behavior pattern is very difficult. So, now, on the other hand, Lord Krishna is omniscient. He can actually see everything in its totality, and that is why the regular conditioned soul is considered to have limited power because there isn't that capacity to see things in totality. One's own behavior, the effect on others, the way one is processing and taking a step back to see if one can alter one's behavior, not having even an understanding on the impact on others of one's behavior. So it's this ignorance that Uddhava is identifying with in a humble mood. So in fact, he's even presenting an argument. And this is his argument, and it's a one-line commentary on this verse by Srila Jiva Goswami. This is Uddhava presenting his argument, we can overcome or we can cross over ignorance. So that is Uddhava's argument in this whole verse. And the word that indicates that is that tarishyama, which means to cross over. So that's actually his argument. We can cross over this ignorance. We can go past this limited power. So a living being develops a particular behavior pattern, and it's something that Uddhava looks at in a conversation with Lord Krishna. So this, although we're reading this particular text, much later on he's thinking of the same subject in this 22nd chapter of this 11th canto. And he asks Lord Krishna. So this is a conversation that takes place between Uddhava and Lord Krishna later on. And it's still Uddhava looking at this development of a behavior pattern that takes place in different living entities. And he asks Lord Krishna, O Supreme Master, the intelligence of those dedicated to fruitive activities, meaning activities that one's doing in order to get particular results, is certainly deviated from you. Please explain to me how such persons accept superior and inferior bodies by their materialistic activities and then give up such bodies. Oh Govinda, this topic is very difficult for foolish persons to understand. Being cheated by illusion in this world, they generally do not become aware of these facts. So this is a very interesting question that's been asked by Uddhava, and it's also looking at an underlying lack of understanding that's there in persons that are constantly performing their activities trying to achieve a particular result, whether it's to form a friendship with someone, whether it's to gain a particular qualification in life, whatever it is. There's actually a particular, what could one say, unawareness of the fact that just those activities with that particular goal in mind or an end in mind are actually creating the next body for oneself. There's an ignorance of that particular fact. And Uddhava puts it, it's really very difficult for foolish persons to understand this. So, and in fact, they generally don't even become aware of these facts. So I was reflecting a great deal on this because I was so aware that, you know, as a young person, being for the first time away from my parental home, I was so aware of the fact that everything was shifting in my whole view of the world, and also that things didn't seem so simple anymore. So when I was looking at this class and Uddhava's words, I was thinking that at that time when I was beginning to question things, like there didn't seem to be an understanding of a broader picture, and that's what I was very aware of at that time, why things were moving in a certain way. And so this is that thing that there's necessity to become aware of how one's life is moving and what are the effects of the decisions one is making. So Uddhava points to the negative results who have forgotten their eternal relationship with Lord Krishna. And this is this fact that you just can't understand the broader picture. You just cannot. And you cannot understand that actually you're creating your next material body through your actions. So Lord Krishna's response explains how a particular behavior pattern develops. And I thought this was just quite wonderful. This is what Lord Krishna says. The material mind of men is shaped by the reactions of fruitive work. Along with the 5 senses, it travels from one material body to another. The spirit soul, although different from the mind, follows it. So the mind is the sort of key component here. It's actually been shaped according to the reactions that are coming. So one may be getting negative reactions because certain friendships don't work out very well. And so one may have some unhappiness that one starts carrying in the mind. And so there's this mind then that's carrying these impressions, these emotions. It's actually going to be what's causing one to travel to the different material body, or the kind of body even one's going to get. So the shaping of the mind by reactions to fruitive work and the consequent following of the subtle body by the spirit soul, because it is joined, is also looked at for one who's using his intelligence. So there's also that personality. So Lord Krishna lists the difficulties that may be experienced by one trying to overcome ignorance and coming to real knowledge. So this is what everyone may have to face. And there's different variations of this, but this is Lord Krishna summarizing what you have to face as you actually making your various decisions on the mental level, and also if you are beginning the path of trying to go past the ignorance, you've become aware that there's a broader picture. There may be a necessity to look to higher control. So this is how Lord Krishna puts it. This is what persons may have to face. Even though neglected, insulted, ridiculed, or envied by bad men, or even though repeatedly agitated by being beaten, tied up, or deprived of one's occupation, spat upon, or polluted with urine by ignorant people, one who desires the highest goal in life should, in spite of all these difficulties, use his intelligence to keep himself safe on the spiritual platform. So this is a painting of the picture, what one may in fact have to be exposed to. Persons envying one. So one may actually have started to use one's intelligence, try and look at a broader reality, try and make the connection with a supreme being. And this is what one may actually have to face. Being ridiculed, being envied, being insulted. And then, of course, even more gross things may happen. And this is preceding a chapter in the Bhagavatam where there's a personality that actually goes through this, being beaten, tied up, deprived of one's occupation. And Lord Krishna says that in spite of all these difficulties, one has to use his intelligence to keep himself safe on the spiritual platform. So a lot of internal dialogue has to take place where one is utilizing intelligence to understand why these things are happening, and a lot of the time it's the ignorance of others. But the safe position is always to retain that connection with the Supreme Being. So this conversation that Uddhava later on has with Krishna continues with Uddhava wanting an explanation of how the mind can remain fixed on the spiritual platform and not be agitated, despite being deprived of material enjoyment, because obviously there's no material enjoyment if you've been envied, ridiculed, insulted, or even on a very gross way, being physically beaten or spat upon or being urinated upon. And this is all part of this thing that one has been pulled outside of oneself. All this external behavior coming from others is pulling one outside of oneself. And this being mocked or being abused with words or being deprived of one's livelihood. So Uddhava wants an explanation of how the mind can remain fixed on the spiritual platform. So now the difficulty is being able to understand how learned persons who know the method of tolerating offenses may still have a strong nature of intolerance. So you see very refined persons who may actually be insulted, mocked, but they have some way of still dealing with it. But it does not mean that internally their mind is tolerant of offenses. They may still be actually have a nature of intolerance, but just they've learned the external behavior. And so Uddhava says to Lord Krishna, "O Lord of the universe, the conditioning of one's personality in material life is very strong. And therefore it's very difficult even for learned men to tolerate the offenses committed against them by ignorant people. Only your devotees who are fixed in your loving service and who have achieved peace by residing at your lotus feet are able to tolerate such offenses." So it's a very interesting thing. I mean, some of us may have had some experience of being treated very poorly, whether it's, being mocked, being insulted, having one's work taken away from oneself. But this is Uddhava's conclusion, that it's only devotees who are fixed in loving service and who have achieved peace because they're residing at the lotus feet of the Lord, they're able to tolerate such offenses. So that's that particular conversation with Uddhava and Krishna in the 22nd chapter. So in today's address to Lord Krishna, Uddhava is speaking from his position of humility. He's seen himself as one of those persons whose mind has a particular learned behavior pattern, and one is almost forced to behave in a particular way because that's a learned pattern in the mind. So, and often you'll hear Western psychologists talk about things being very cyclical. So the mind has a pattern, so it will follow a certain course. So persons may say that periodically they fall into a particular state. It's because there's that learned behavioral pattern. So Srila Vishwanath paraphrases Uddhava's communication. And this is how Srila Vishwanath puts Uddhava's words. Your great devotees do not need to cross over Maya as a result of their bhakti. But we are not like these great devotees. How can we be so confident? And Srila Vishwanath continues to paraphrase Uddhava. He says, we will cross Maya with your devotees who have a similar nature to us. We will not cross with the naked sages. What is the method? Crossing the darkness of Maya is easy by the light from your Sudarshan chakra in the form of remembering and glorifying your pastimes, joking with your gopi lovers. So that is how Srila Vishwanath, paraphrasing Uddhava, even though Uddhava is presenting himself as one of those persons with the learned behavioral patterns in the mind, how he's actually still saying it will be possible to cross over this. And the way I'm going to do it is with those who have a similar nature to me. And that darkness of this kind of conditioned state, this learned pattern state, it's actually going to be dissipated just by remembering and glorifying your pastimes. So Srila Sukadeva Goswami, he outlines the means by which advanced transcendentalists or liberated souls realize the Lord, because that's who Uddhava is saying, that those who are remembering and glorifying Lord's pastimes, they're advanced in that practice. So Srila Sukadeva Goswami, he outlines the means by which such advanced transcendentalists or liberated souls realize the Lord. And they have an advanced experience of transcendental knowledge. And for this reason, they take pleasure in the discussion of transcendental qualities of the Lord's pastimes. So clearly, Uddhava falls into this category of a transcendentalist, because he clearly does take pleasure in the discussion of transcendental qualities of the Lord, because he's bringing it up. And interestingly enough, there's a method that's common to those with a similar nature, because that's what Uddhava's point is, that he's going to overcome Maya. I mean, he's presenting himself in this with great humility, that he has to cross over Maya. And he's saying there's a method that's common to those with a similar nature. So just as Uddhava is pointing to the method, so does Srila Sukadeva Goswami. And this is the method. Constant chanting of the holy name of the Lord after the ways of the great authorities is the doubtless and fearless way of success for all, including those who are free from material distress, those who are desirous of all material enjoyment, and also those who are self-satisfied by dint of transcendental knowledge. So it applies to all categories of persons, whether one's already having transcendental knowledge, completely satisfied in themselves, persons who still are looking for material enjoyment, persons who are wanting to be free from material distress. It doesn't matter which category one is in. This is the method to cross over those problems that present themselves with the mind wanting to get certain results, having learned patterns, constant chanting of the holy name of the Lord after the ways of the great authorities. That's how Srila Sukadeva Goswami puts it. So, I mean, I've been thinking a lot about this topic, because in my case, it took, I noticed that just because I was thinking about how there had to be another reality, a much broader reality. I was studying psychology at that time. Somehow it led me to, somehow other, I once ended up accompanying a friend to go to a devotee farm where some prasadam was being served. So I took prasadam. I had no idea. So that was the beginning. So just the questioning of those patterns in the mind brings some connection with transcendental reality. Now, there are different relationships with the Lord, and there are varieties of chanting the holy name. And that's according to different relationships and melas. There are 5 kinds of remembering of the Lord. One starts to conduct research into the worship of a particular form of the Lord. That could be a first step. A second way of remembering the Lord could be trying to concentrate the mind on one subject and withdrawing the mind with its thinking, feeling, and willing from other subjects. A third one is concentrating on a particular form of the Lord, which is called meditation. A fourth one is concentrating the mind continuously on the form of the Lord. And as one makes these choices, because the idea is that, you've become aware of this problem with the mind, and so there's choices that are being made of how you're actually going to bring the mind into some more controlled space outside of its patterns. So these were some of the methods. You research worship of a particular form of the Lord. You concentrate the mind on one subject and withdraw the mind from other subjects. Concentrate the mind continuously on the form of the Lord. So there's an awakening or a liking for concentrating on a particular form of the Lord. This is what happens. So concentrating the mind upon particular pastimes of the Lord is called remembrance. So according to one's taste and strength of hearing, chanting, and remembering, this may be followed by wanting to serve the lotus feet of the Lord. So one obtains perfection when one constantly thinks of the Lord's lotus feet. And when one is particularly adhering to this process of serving the lotus feet of the Lord, other processes may be included, such as seeing the form of the Lord, touching the form of the Lord, or circumambulating and visiting places with the form of the Lord, such as Tirtha places, Jagannath Puri, Dwarka, etc., and also bathing in the Ganges. And after serving the lotus feet of the Lord comes the process of deity worship, Archana, which necessitates learning the process from a bona fide spiritual master. So in Kali Yuga, even without Archana, the process of deity worship, everything can be perfectly performed just through hearing, chanting, and remembering the Lord's lotus feet. So that's the means for tackling this problem of the mind with all its learned patterns and the way it's forces one to behave and forces one to then get particular reactions or take actions and get particular reactions. So the disciples of Srila Prabhupada, they make this statement that one who's absorbed himself in this incomparable bliss of thinking of the Lord's abode easily becomes free from all lamentation, illusion, and fear. So that is what one can expect, that all those states of feeling that are there in the mind, of lamenting, of fearing, of being caught up in illusion, all of that starts to leave just by beginning this process of meditating on the Lord's lotus feet and then coming to develop a liking for doing so. So this was some examination of this particular, or these two particular texts of today. If there's some thought that you might wish to contribute, please feel free.
It's a very interesting subject, as you mentioned. This sort of shaping of the mind, and one's take a particular way of acting. Some of the things that we see in the mind, at least that we experience as conditioned soul, is the mind has a particular likes and dislikes. So you enter into that sort of condition. You know, there are things that I accept, there are things that I reject according to how my nature is. And one's very much conditioned to that. Now, you explain that the means to start to change that type of condition is by association. By associating, association will sort of start to change the way, some of those patterns that have formed in terms of likes and dislikes. And of course, the first thing that or the first stages of devotional service have to, highlight that sadhu sangha, association with devotees. Now, we find ourselves that the majority of the association that we have with devotees is devotees, most of us, are still conditioned by those patterns of accepting and rejecting of the mind, when most of us are not free from the influence of the false ego and the influence of ignorance, where most of us are in the process of trying to become free from that and purify from those conditions, no? And then we are in that association, and in that association we find that you're exposed to all these different, conflicting transactions and relationships. And navigating through that is sometimes very challenging. So to understand that principle of association in that realistic circumstance, because we hear, sat sangha is association of, saintly people, of devotional people. And the ideals are high, but when it translates to reality, it's much more complicated. We do have the association of very elevated souls, but the majority of association is with devotees who are still struggling with condition. So there's very wonderful explanations about it, and it's a wonderful thing to actually fully understand how still that association, the association that we have among in the Kanishta platform, still valid and still powerful, but we have to understand it very properly. And yes, so I think it's a very good subject matter to dive into.
Yes, that's a very nice point being brought up, that indeed association starts to shape the mind, and if one comes into the association of devotees, satsanga, then the question becomes, in some sense, what is the impact on the mind, because actually most persons are indeed trying to reshape their minds through taking to trying to meditate on the Lord's lotus feet. So the question is, how well does it actually work, the reshaping of the mind in the association of persons with the same goal of meditating on the Lord's lotus feet, but having the same problem of needing to reshape the mind. So, is it that everybody's not in the same position? So is there going to actually be positive effects on everyone? I mean, it's a very valid question. So there's no doubt that, like in psychological terms, behaviors get stronger when they're reinforced. So if one is receiving reinforcement for one's new behaviors, one's acts of devotion, one's acts of service, that is that part of reshaping the mind, that is now where the mind is moving to, because the reinforcement is coming in that area. So it's strengthening the actions that are in service to the Supreme Lord, because those around one are also attempting to do that. So everyone is actually receiving reinforcement and reshaping of the mind just because of those around one having that same intention and desire. Now, the fact that there's pre-existing learned behaviors in the mind in persons that have now taken to this process of trying to meditate on the Lord's lotus feet through hearing and chanting, the extent to which those pre-existing patterns in the mind emerge, and certainly there's ample opportunity because they're existing for them to emerge. But there's a significant difference, and that is that because one's under the protection of the Supreme Lord, because one is trying to take shelter of his lotus feet, then somehow whatever starts to become prominent from the pre-existing pattern gets exposed to oneself. So one may repeatedly find oneself responding in a particular way, and one starts to become conscious, oh, this is a particular pattern I have. So, and it's quite extraordinary because it's clearly been orchestrated by the Supreme Lord that aspect of one's mental pattern is getting exposed. So it becomes one's duty to actually look at that, what's been exposed to one about a particular part of the mental pattern, behavioral pattern that one has. And the duty is to acknowledge it and see if it actually needs to be altered, and if it's having negative effects on oneself or having negative effects on others. So there's that's what's called the mercy that one's receiving, that one actually gets an opportunity for it to be exposed to one, some particular aspect of one's pattern in the mind. And again, it's one's duty to attend to that. If one fails to do so, or one chooses to turn a blind eye to it, although that seems very difficult, because if one's practicing devotional life, it's very graphic. And it's clearly some mercy that's been shown to one, that one can see some aspect of one's mental pattern. If one chooses to turn a blind eye, because one is invested in one's mental pattern, that will lead to some big problems, certainly, where there's some greater difficulty that emerges because one is choosing to ignore the mercy that's been shown to one. So sometimes one sees that persons are invested in their mental pattern, and they go with that mental pattern and do not do the necessary reflection, and it causes trouble to others, it causes trouble to themselves, and sometimes there's having to leave the association of persons who are pursuing that meditation on the Lord's lotus feet. So that's a choice a person has to make for themselves.
Hare Krishna, Mathaji. Some other the mental pattern and the tendency of person's behavior and other things. It's true, as you said, that everybody has to introspect about their own behavior. If not, then naturally, because of him, many will burn out, as they say. Burn out. They'll fry themselves out and they can go away from the devotees' association. But at the same time, as Prabhu has mentioned, that we are staying in that association which is not so advanced.
It's not what?
It's not so advanced. But here what Uddhava is saying, we have to stay in the association of advanced devotees. Because only in the association of advanced devotees we can remember Krishna.
We get what?
We can remember Krishna. Only in advanced devotees association it is possible. But as you have said, as Prabhu has said, that it is quite rare to find such advanced devotees, and mostly we are dealing with the Kanishta Adhikari level devotees. So in that course, since our ideals are high, but we are practically staying on a lower level, how to migrate from this level to that level?
Yeah. It's a very important question. Actually moving from a level of being perhaps on the Kanishta platform of which is defined as only seeing the deity or acknowledging the form of the Lord, but not really being able to acknowledge other persons around one, which sounds so unbelievable. But it's a reality, because that's the definition of Kanishta. So the question you've raised of how is it that one is able to transition from that Kanishta level where one practically, literally is not able to fully see other people, to the Majjhima level where there's actually the reality of being able to acknowledge others, being able to properly interact with others with proper respect, with proper care, with proper attention, with valuing others. It's a very big question, and a lot of it has to do with truly internally acknowledging one's learned mental patterns and having to understand something of the workings of one's mind. And then, because of the great good fortune that one is hearing and chanting, one is actually developing intelligence. So the intelligence where one is actually understanding, I need to actually understand that I have a learned pattern in the mind. That intelligence can then equip one to know that one has to take a certain course of action. And the course of action that needs to be taken is, let me examine this pattern that I have in the mind. Let me see how it's playing itself out. Let me become more aware of perhaps certain aspects of emotion or certain aspects of my desires that are just learned, and do they really belong to me? Is it not something that I've just taken on perhaps from family life? Is it something that I genuinely want for myself? Or is it just something that I've learned or I've imbibed as a result of growing up in a particular family or a particular community? So there has to be monitoring of that pattern or those patterns in the mind. It's one's responsibility, because that is what's going to, as one becomes more aware of that internally for oneself, that is what's going to allow one to actually become more conscious also of others and the fact that they too may be struggling with mental patterns. And so because one is doing that work oneself, for oneself, one is actually able to be more compassionate or be more understanding or actually know how to deal with others that, although having the nice ideal of wanting to meditate on the Lord's lotus feet, are also caught in some mental pattern that forces them to behave in a particular way. So that movement is to a higher stage of devotional life, of coming to a Majjhima stage, is definitely reliant on the word you used was the introspection. It's essential. What I've learned from because it was my area of study, is that on a psychological level, it's very useful to actually even write down the thoughts one has, and the ones that, one is considering are not serving a purpose, or they actually may belong to family members, not really oneself, but one has just had it so droned into one that one thinks that's one's thought. One has to actually put the thought that one wants. So writing the thought one doesn't want to the thought one wants. One may literally have to write it down so one can graphically see what one is wanting to alter. And this is a personal process, but it has major ramification for one's dealing with others and one's moving to a higher stage of truly being able to have very good relationships with others that are on the same path. So that's a thought.
I was just going to add that in the level that most of us are, this Kanishta level is fundamental and important that we have a structure practices. It's what Krishna says, by regulation, then we can actually start to tackle the mind. That's what, 6th chapter. And abhyasa and vairagya, no? By constant practice and by renunciation, like that, and detachment. So, constant practice. So, our lifeline and the thing that brings us all together is sadhana bhakti. That's the thing that our association is association of sadhakas. So I remember when back in time, closer to Prabhupada's time, where we receive in temple ashram, the association of the ashram was a strong emphasis on sadhana. So there was no space to do anything else. So and everybody will do it, from the leaders to the new devotee. Mongol Arctic, everybody will stay in the temple room chanting the rounds. I think in India it's like that too. In the strong ashrams, it's always like that. There was no question of anyone walking out of the Bhagavatam class, until the Bhagavatam is finished, because it's sadhana, it's a Bhagavatam. So, such a strong emphasis on the sadhana practices is what allows, not only an individual but a whole temple to elevate, the whole consciousness and practices. We're depending on sadhana.
So you are saying that if the sadhana has been emphasized more and is been given more prominence, that will help a person to rise from lower level to upper level? Okay. So, and is it is a responsibility of an individual, or it is a responsibility of the management or something like that?
The biggest burden is on the leaders, because the leaders cannot afford. I mean, the simple devotees, you go through, but the leaders are the one that says, "You do as I say." You can, you do as I do, not do as I say. If you're not able to show, the leaders have no space to actually act, because then the whole thing is, there's no seriousness. Who's going to take you serious if you say, come to Bhagavatam class, but you can't stay in Bhagavatam class?
So that is a nice exchange, just putting an emphasis on the structure provided by sadhana that's adhered to quite strictly by practitioners within a temple setting is what gives the strength for all the work that may need to be done on an individual level, but just the adherence to the sadhana is raising the consciousness. So and the emphasis on the leader's role in making that a reality. So thank you very much for the contribution. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai.